Hi, I'm Michelle Weems and I'd like to welcome you to the latest business seminar organised by the University of the Highlands and Islands with Business Gateway and the Enterprise Europe Network. The University's Gary I. Campbell interviews a special guest each week, which was recorded in front of a live audience. In the final seminar of the series, Gary interviews Lee McGrath, General Manager of ReBOOT, on how do you make a social enterprise sustainable. Before we go to the interview, let's have a quick chat with Gary about his interview with Lee. Gary, if the sole purpose of a social enterprise is not for profit, how can you make it sustainable?
You know, again, that's a fantastic question because actually social enterprises have to make profits. This not-for-profit thing is a bit of a misnomer. Any business, whether it's a social enterprise, whether it's a charity, whether it's a private sector business, actually has to make profits or surpluses to remain in business. If you don't, you won't be there. The thing is, with a social enterprise, what you've got to do is then work out what to do with the profits. And the great thing is, the more profits or the more surplus you make, the more you can actually do for the good of the charity or the objectives you were set up for. So when it comes to sustainability, one of the most important things is not to rely on grant funding and not to rely on donations, but actually to make the business into something more akin to a private sector business so that you're not relying on these sources of money, but you're actually generating the funds yourself. Then you're making up the surpluses, and then you're going to be able to use them for the objectives for which your social enterprise was set up. So it's really important that it's sustainable, because that means that you can then do various things. You don't have to rely on somebody or sit there and wonder when the next grant application comes out or whether the next donation is going to come in from a big benefactor. You can go and run the business, you can make the money, and you can go and do the good that you set the whole thing up for in the first place.
Thanks very much, Gary. We're now going over to the Executive Office of the University of the Highlands and Islands for the interview.
Lee, thanks very much for coming along.
Thanks, Gary. Thank you.
First of all, I understand that you're a UHI graduate as well. You know, so how was that? How did you come to UHI and how did you find it?
I was a graduate 2000 to 2004. College and study wasn't new to me. I'd been at Murray College studying computing, engineering, and really couldn't put my finger on what it was, you know, I wanted to do with my life as a young lad. Took a lot of time out doing various jobs just to pay the way, and then in 2000 saw this great course which started as a BA. They worked it out. It was actually a BSc in Rural Development Studies. It kind of ticked my boxes. I like working with people, I like working with communities, and I like, you know, anything to do with the environment. So got involved. It took an extra year. Had to take a time out. 3 kids in that time.
Okay.
Kept it pretty busy. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Great variety of work. It worried me a little bit when I came out because I felt like I was certainly a kind of jack of all, master of none, just through the content within the course. But then I soon realised that actually, I was the master of rural development.
Fantastic. So it did what it said in the tin at the end of the day. That's great to hear.
Yeah.
I was always very nervous asking that question there, what the answer might be, but that's fine. We'll carry on then.
Perfect.
So, and then you went to ReBOOT, which is a social enterprise. You recycle computer and IT equipment. What attracted you to ReBOOT? And then when you went there, you know, as a social enterprise supposed to be in a business, what did you think that would hold for you?
The attraction, I'll be honest, one of the first attractions was being a poor student, just finishing up. I needed a job. So, you know, one of the first things was certainly, you know, trying to find sustainable work for myself. ReBOOT itself ticked in, on a personal level, computers and the environment. So it really fitted in with all of those years of study leading up to it. I came on board in 2005 as a development worker, and the focus of my position there was to raise the profile of what was then, they still considered it a charity. So I was tasked with the job of managing the volunteers and raising the profile of the organisation, and pretty much left them on devices to get on with that. And
you know, again, it's a kind of sales job. I understand what you're saying, but as a charity, what was the situation there at the time? You know, how was it? You know, what kind of income did you get? How was it funded?
ReBOOT at the time, as I say, was certainly a traditional charity. It was all grant-led. There was a tiny portion of trade, if you wish, of sales of the computer systems we had, and it was quite a difficult process for anyone to engage with ReBOOT. It was very much closed doors. If you wanted to go for a computer system, you had to fill in a long application.
All right.
Then that application came back to the workshops. Individuals then custom built that computer system. We're not talking about custom built high-spec computer systems. We're just talking about a standard system that individuals had come to us for. So you were looking, a computer system could sometimes take up to 2.5, 3 weeks from application arriving to phoning the customer up. So it was a very closed environment, quite strict, very much focused on that grant funding.
Okay.
Number of occasions where they get to the end of the year and look at where they were going to apply for the next grant, and trying to fit in to the grant funders. And although they kept within their charitable remits and their objectives, it kept changing and chopping. It was quite a difficult environment, for me personally to work in.
I can understand what you say, a bit like the tail wagging the dog, the charitable grant tail wagging what you actually did on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely, yeah.
And and speaking to yourself, you've explained that people apply for computers because it's my understanding that you take old IT systems, you either refurbish them and either give them away where people are in need, or sell them or break them up where the things are past their user date. And so I mean there seems to be a business in there, and then you come along as the business development man.
Yeah.
So and obviously you clearly weren't very happy about this dependency on grant funding. Yeah. So what did you do?
Well, it was a difficult task because as the development worker there, I didn't have that much clout in the early days. The board of directors, again, focused more on a traditional voluntary charitable board of directors, so they were getting quite involved in the daily operations and not looking at strategy and not looking at the bigger picture. Number of different conversations with board members, staff members, looking at great opportunities. I was doing my research, I was looking around the country, looking around the world, and looking at how people were doing it in a sustainable way. It still really wasn't shifting people. We were getting a little bit of movement and a little bit of understanding, but what the final crux of it was a very small grant that I applied for, to, in the words of having a bit of a jolly around the countryside, looking at enterprises that do it well, but taking directors and taking staff members that weren't convinced and getting them to physically see it. So that was I would say, the major turning point. We started looking actually as what you'd maybe consider a social enterprise.
Okay, as opposed to a charity.
Absolutely,
yes.
Yeah.
And those, from that point forward, I think you said to me that was the last grant you ever applied for or something. But since then, I mean, how many years has been that now that you've actually been running it? What I would, in my days gone by, or even today, would call a business that's got a social purpose. How many years is that?
We've been running sustainably now for 6 years. So no support at all. The closest you'll probably get for financial support, some people would indicate, is some of the training programs like Community Jobs Scotland, Future Jobs Fund. I think most people, when they're defining a social enterprise, ignore that aspect, and private businesses can get the same. So 6 years we've been fully sustainable, and not just sustainable either, developing.
Well, this is what I was going to ask you. What have you done to sustain this over that period of time? Because clearly, I suppose like any other businesses, if you stand still, you go backwards.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's been one key point I'll leave to the end of it. We've been doing lots of small things, because it wasn't just about economic sustainability of the organisation. It was also about the field within the organisation, and changing the whole psyche of the way people work. Right. We opened a sales area, which obviously allowed us to actually be more engaged with the public. We looked at changing the whole format that we actually reported to the board of directors, and put the directors through a number of different training programs so they understood the governance and they understood that they're looking at strategy. Leave the staff to work on the daily operations, you guys focus on strategy. So that was a big one, and we started giving them more information so they could make informed decisions, as opposed to before. It was a little bit like, back on the back of a cigarette packet. This is what's been going on this quarter. So we really focused on that. Internal newsletters that got everyone involved. Right. So everyone could input into this letter. It would go out quarterly, and it would give everyone an insight into what we were up to in various aspects of the business. We tried eBay sales, various other bits and bobs to kind of take us away. Monthly statistics, again, picture paints 1,000 words.
The graphs.
The graphs, yeah, which was great because
Right.
you know, especially the board of management could actually sit down and physically just see how we're performing, which they hadn't done in the past. It was very much, as I say, this basis of the grant funding. Worked away from there on lots and lots of other little bits and bobs, but the key one for us was a thing that I'd been chasing for a number of years prior to that, which was the Fujitsu contract we successfully bidded for and got through basically winding them up and continuously phoning up and saying we're here.
And this is Fujitsu, who have got, of course, got the Highland Council contract.
Yeah.
And they replace, I presume they replace the IT equipment on a regular basis. So what happened with yourselves? Do you take the old stuff away from them, effectively?
Yeah, absolutely. We were contracted by Fujitsu as part of Fujitsu's contract to Highland Council. Looking at Highland Council's single outcome agreements, looking at the community benefits clauses, they needed to engage with a non-for-profit local organisation. We were there, they were aware of us, we were on the radar. We kept bugging them and winding them up and saying we're here. It was a long process working. It was new to us to deal with such a big organisation and make sure that we weren't doing ourselves out, making sure that we were able to develop from this opportunity and again, not sit still and also not end up in a situation where, you know, we were maybe getting backed into a corner with this big corporate firm there.
But I mean, it's my understanding, I mean, you are effectively a full-blown supplier to Fujitsu in the same way that anyone else would be, is that correct?
It certainly is, yeah, absolutely. We're contracted with them until 2015. We'll basically mirror the Highland Council contract. Very difficult to, as I say, to pin them down. Obviously, they've got a lot of money, a big corporation like that, but there's also a lot of red tape and a lot of people to cut through to get there. And on our side, there was me.
Okay.
So the balance was, but in a way, we played that to our advantage, and we sat on our hands at times and said, no, we're not playing. You know, we need to make sure that this is going to suit us, and ultimately, you know, it can't affect current operations and. You know, we have to make sure that we're protecting the enterprise reboot. So yeah, it worked slowly, very slowly. It's very difficult when you're dealing with large councils and large corporate organisations to get any movement from them. You know, we can turn things around quite quickly because we're a smaller company, whereas you're waiting a long time.
But you got there in the end.
We got there in the end. As I say, we're contract to. Basically, we take all of Highland Council's old equipment, we assess it, we see if it's worthwhile reusing, if it's reusable, we sanitize it, build it back up, clean it, electrically test it, and then it goes back to Highland Council, where we've got a modest contract with them for distribution, and then it's handed out to community organisations across the Highlands.
Fantastic. So going forward, I mean, you're saying that that's 2015. You've got a business here. It's a social enterprise that is fully sustained. Going forward, how do you see the future for ReBOOT? Is it just in Forres, or what do you think might happen next?
Well, we're in Inverness now as well.
Okay.
So we have a warehouse and offices in Inverness, and obviously the warehouse is a sales area shop in Forres. We want to obviously sustain that and develop. So whilst we don't want to rest back on our laurels with the idea that okay, we're successful working with Fujitsu on behalf of Highland Council, we'll still be working hard to carry on keeping that relationship up. We're also aware that we don't want to put all our eggs in one basket. So part of the development that got us to the position we're in now is the annual away day, where we invite all our volunteers, all our directors, staff, all together, and we do a bit of brainstorming for the day. This year's one focused on development of ReBOOT, post Fujitsu. What are we going to do? We could still be doing this, but where are the other opportunities? So we came out of that away day with a massive amount of information about where we could go, and this was given to us by the people that live and breathe it. This is
your workout from the volunteers all the way up.
Yeah, this is down from the guys and girls that break up the computer systems, that build them, to the guys and girls that sit on the board, make the strategy decisions as such. So vast amount of information. We've taken that away. We've set up a subcommittee, social enterprise subcommittee. Again, linked in with directors, everyday volunteers that come in and work, and staff. So there's a good mix between it. They're going to be looking at, and we've just approached HIE to look at account management and see if there's any other support we can work on from there.
Fantastic. But just before we finish up, you know, just from yourself, what have you learned along the way in this journey that you personally and also for the organisation?
There's probably lots of things I've actually learned, but a few points come to mind. Keep an eye on your objectives. As a social enterprise, we needed to keep coming back and remind ourselves of those, and we remind them, you know, through the away days, through the internal newsletters, you know, through the nature of what we are. So just certainly keep an eye on your objectives and make sure you stick close to them, because that, you know, they're your guiding rules, if you wish. They're the link back there. Having clearly defined roles and responsibilities, not just for the staff, but for the volunteers, for the directors. Our board of directors now meet. They know what they're doing. They know what they're focused on. They're not going to sit there and question an electric bill or ask why we're using a particular company. They trust their staff. That's what they employ them for. So make sure that there are clear roles and responsibilities there. The biggie for me is probably keeping that balance between the money and the people. Money obviously allows you to finance and run your enterprise, but people do as well. And that goes in any enterprise. Doesn't necessarily have to be a social enterprise, but probably more so. Right. Remember the triple bottom line, you know, the money, the people, and the environment.
I'd like to thank Lee McGrath very much for this. It was fantastic.
That was an interview with Lee McGrath of ReBOOT speaking to Gary I. Campbell of the University of the Highlands and Islands. This programme was produced by Inverness TV in association with Business Gateway and the Enterprise Europe Network. That was the last seminar of the series. I do hope you've enjoyed watching. I'm Michelle Weems, and I hope you'll join us again for the next series of business seminars.